A peaceful dive turned into pure terror when a massive great white shark breached the safety cage, dragging two divers into open water. Blood churned the sea as the predator struck with relentless force, leaving only twisted metal and crimson stains behind. This is just one of the 6 horrifying shark attack stories that reveal the true power and unpredictability of these ocean predators. The waters off the coast of South Australia are home to some of the world's most giant great white sharks. These apex predators, known for their incredible speed and powerful jaws, have made this area famous among divers. People around the globe visit Port Lincoln to experience cage diving, a chance to get up close with these majestic but fearsome creatures. On October 19, 2024, 2 seasoned divers, Emma Callahan and Sarah Briggs, arrived at the marina, ready for what they hoped would be the adventure of a lifetime. Emma and Sarah, both in their early 30s, had been friends since college and shared a love for the ocean. They'd been diving together for years, exploring coral reefs and deep-sea caves. This was their first time cage diving with great whites. That morning, they joined a small group on a boat operated by South Coast Expeditions, a well-known company specializing in shark tours. The day was calm, and the crew chatted with the divers about safety measures and the unique behaviors of great whites. Great white sharks are drawn to these waters by abundant seals and fish. The crew explained that the sharks' heightened senses, especially their ability to detect vibrations, often make them curious about human activity. Though cage diving is considered safe, everyone must respect the animals and avoid sudden movements that could draw too much attention. By mid-morning, the boat anchored near Neptune Islands, a hotspot for shark sightings. The crew began baiting the water with chunks of fish known as chumming to attract sharks. Emma and Sarah, dressed in wetsuits, were pulling on their masks and tanks. They laughed nervously as they helped each other secure their gear. The first group of divers entered the water, descending into the cage suspended beside the boat. The women watched intently, waiting their turn. When it was their time, Emma and Sarah climbed down the narrow ladder into the cage, their fins splashing slightly as they settled inside. The cage was small, with metal bars separating them from the open water. The women held onto the bars, peering into the blue expanse, their breaths loud through the regulator. At first, everything was calm. A few smaller sharks swam by, their sleek bodies gliding effortlessly through the water. The women signaled to each other, excited by the close encounter. As time passed, more giant sharks began to appear. A massive great white, estimated to be about 15 feet long, swam closer to the cage. Its movements were slow and deliberate, its eyes black and unblinking. Emma tapped Sarah's shoulder, pointing toward the shark as it turned sharply, circling the cage. The creature's presence was electrifying but intimidating. Its sheer size made the cage feel smaller. The boat crew above observed, shouting updates to those in the cage. The shark's behavior shifted. It became more aggressive. It began bumping the cage with its snout, testing the structure. Emma and Sarah clutched the bars, their excitement turned to unease. The crew banged on the side of the boat, attempting to distract the shark, but it seemed fixated on the cage. Suddenly, the shark surged forward, its jaws snapping at the metal bars. The force of the attack sent vibrations through the cage. Emma tried to back away, but there was nowhere to go. The shark struck again, its teeth scraping against the metal. The women's breathing quickened as they realized the cage might not hold. Above water, the crew scrambled to pull the cage up, but the shark was relentless. In a horrifying moment, the shark's powerful jaws clamped onto one of the bars, bending it just enough to create an opening. Emma screamed as the shark lunged forward, grabbing her arm. The force yanked her through the gap, and the regulator ripped from her mouth. Sarah reached out, trying to hold on to her friend, but the shark thrashed violently, pulling Emma into open water. Sarah was frozen for a moment, her mind racing. Then she grabbed the cage bars, desperately trying to climb out. The shark returned before she could reach the ladder, slamming into the cage. The impact knocked Sarah off balance, and she fell back into the water. The cage swayed dangerously, the opening from the bent bar now wide enough for the shark to push through. The shark returned with terrifying speed, its jaws closing around Sarah's leg. She kicked wildly, her screams muffled by the regulator. The predator dragged her out of the cage, blood clouding the water as she disappeared into the depths. Emma was nowhere to be seen. Above, the crew shouted orders, frantically trying to reel the cage back to the boat. Another shark had appeared, drawn by the commotion. The water churned with activity, and the surface splattered with blood. The other divers on board watched in horror, unable to do anything but wait for the crew's next move. The boat crew launched a small rescue dinghy, hoping to locate the woman. They scanned the water, their radios crackling as they called for help. Minutes felt like hours as they circled the area. But there was no sign of Emma or Sarah. The only evidence of the attack was the damaged cage and the crimson stain in the water. By the time authorities arrived, it was clear there was little hope. The divers were gone, claimed by the ocean and its most fearsome predator. The crew was devastated, their faces pale as they recounted the events. Though cage diving was known for its safety record, this incident reminded everyone of the unpredictable nature of the wild. The tragedy left a lasting mark on the diving community. Emma Callahan and Sarah Briggs, experienced and careful divers, had trusted the cage to protect them. But the power of the great white shark, driven by instinct and strength, proved overwhelming. That day, the waters off South Australia became the site of a rare and brutal breach, a chilling reminder of the ocean's untamed power. Monmouth County, New Jersey, is a summer magnet for surfers and beachgoers. The waters of this part of the Atlantic coast are rich in fish and other marine life, making it a perfect hunting ground for predators like the great white shark. These massive sharks, sometimes growing over 15 feet long, are drawn to the area's murky shallows where seals and fish thrive. While shark sightings are common here, attacks are rare, but they are never out of the question. For surfers, the thrill of riding the waves often outweighs the risks. It was a warm morning in late summer 2024 when Ryan Whitaker, a seasoned surfer, arrived at a beach in Monmouth County. Ryan, in his mid-30s, had grown up surfing this coastline. He knew the waves here better than most, timing his sessions with the tides and swells. That morning, the waves were perfect, rolling and breaking cleanly, offering an ideal canvas for riders. Ryan parked his truck, waxed his board, and stretched on the sand. The beach was quiet except for a handful of early risers preparing to paddle out. On August 23, 2024, at around 7:30 a.m., Ryan had waded into the water, his board tucked under his arm. The ocean felt colder than usual, and the water was cloudier, stirred by the tide. He paddled beyond the breakers, scanning the horizon for the next wave. Surfing had always been a meditation for him, a moment of peace and focus. This morning felt no different. He spotted his friends, Nate and Jared, further out, their boards bobbing in the water as they waited for a set. Beneath the surface, the murky water hid a predator. Great whites often use the element of surprise when hunting. Their ability to sense movement and vibrations makes them masterful ambush hunters. In the last decade, shark activity along this stretch of coastline has increased, fueled by warmer waters and thriving prey populations. Signs posted at the beach reminded visitors to stay alert, but the warnings blended into the background for most surfers. Ryan caught his first wave of the day, carving across the face with practiced ease. As he paddled back out, he noticed the water seemed unusually still. The lull between sets often brought an eerie quiet, but today it felt heavier. A faint splash to his right caught his attention. He paused, his arms resting on his board, and glanced around. Nate and Jared were laughing, oblivious to anything unusual. Ryan shrugged off the feeling and paddled further, determined to catch the next big wave. Without warning, a massive force struck from below. The attack was swift and violent. A great white shark, estimated at over 13 feet, had risen from the depths, its jaws closing around Ryan's right leg. The pressure was overwhelming, like being crushed in a vice. Ryan screamed, the sound swallowed by the ocean as he thrashed wildly. His instincts took over and he began punching and kicking at the shark's snout, desperate to free himself. The shark's grip tightened, its teeth cutting deeper into his leg. Blood poured into the water, turning it red and thick around him. Ryan's mind raced as pain shot through his body. He knew he had to fight, or he wouldn't make it. He aimed another punch at the shark's eye, the only vulnerable spot he could think of. The shark released him momentarily, but the damage was done. His leg was shredded, the bite severing muscle, arteries, and bone. Ryan tried to paddle back toward the shore, but his strength was fading. Each movement sent waves of pain through his body. He looked down and saw the blood streaming from his leg, the water around him swirling crimson. His board drifted out of reach as he struggled to stay afloat. The shark circled back, drawn by the scent of blood. Its dorsal fin broke the surface, a chilling reminder that the attack wasn't over. Nate and Jared saw the commotion and started paddling toward Ryan, shouting and waving for help. A few onlookers noticed the splashing on the beach and ran to get the lifeguards. The shark lunged again, its massive body brushing against Ryan. He kicked weakly, his energy draining fast. Nate reached him first, grabbing his arm and pulling him onto his board. Jared joined seconds later, helping to steady Ryan as the three frantically paddled toward shore. The shark followed, its shadow visible beneath the water. Nate and Jared yelled and splashed, trying to deter it. The predator veered away but stayed close, its hunger not yet satisfied. Ryan's vision blurred as the blood loss took its toll. His friends paddled harder, shouting for help as they approached the shallows. Lifeguards waded into the surf, grabbing Ryan and hauling him onto the sand. His leg was a mangled mess, the wound gushing blood. The lifeguards worked quickly, tying a tourniquet above the bite to slow the bleeding. Ryan's face was pale, his breaths shallow. Paramedics arrived within minutes, loading him onto a stretcher and rushing him to the nearest hospital. The beach was chaotic, with surfers and beachgoers crowding around, shaken by what they had witnessed. Nate and Jared stood silently, their boards forgotten on the sand, their faces pale and tense. The shark was gone, disappearing back into the deep after the attack. In the ambulance, Ryan drifted in and out of consciousness. The paramedics worked tirelessly to stabilize him, but the damage was severe. By the time they reached the hospital, Ryan had lost a significant amount of blood. Doctors fought to save him, but the injuries proved too extensive. Hours later, news of his death spread, leaving the local surf community in shock. That day would be remembered as one of the most horrifying shark attacks in Monmouth County's history. Surfers who had once braved the waters without fear began to think twice. Great white sharks had always been a part of the ocean's ecosystem, but this attack reminded everyone of the risks of sharing the water with such mighty predators. For those who knew Ryan, the loss was devastating. A tragic end to a life spent chasing waves. Icebound Cove Park, located in Alaska, is a vast wilderness known for its icy fjords, towering glaciers, and abundant wildlife. It's one of the best places in the world to see orcas, the ocean's apex predators. These black and white giants, sometimes called killer whales, are known for their intelligence, speed, and complex social behavior. Pods of orcas roam the icy waters here, hunting seals, fish, and even larger prey like whales. In July 2024, marine biologist Lucas Hensley set out to kayak in these waters as part of his research on the park's ecosystem. It was supposed to be a peaceful day of observation and note-taking. That morning, July 15, 2024, Lucas loaded his kayak with gear. He had packed food, a waterproof notebook, and a dry bag containing emergency supplies. As a scientist studying marine life, Lucas had spent years in the field observing everything from humpback whales to sea lions. This trip was part of a larger project to document the behavior of orcas in Icebound Cove. The weather was calm, and the water mirrored the surrounding glaciers. It seemed like the perfect day for research. By 8 a.m., Lucas paddled away from the small boat that had dropped him off. He planned to spend several hours navigating the quieter inlets of the bay, where orcas were often spotted hunting for food. He was alone, but Lucas was used to solitude in the field. As he paddled, he scanned the water for movement, jotting notes whenever he saw seals sunbathing on ice floes or schools of fish swimming beneath the surface. A little after 10 a.m., Lucas noticed something unusual. In the distance, a pod of orcas surfaced, their dorsal fins slicing through the water. He stopped paddling and watched as they moved together, their movements synchronized. Orcas are highly social animals, often traveling in family groups called pods. This pod was hunting, their sharp movements hinting at a coordinated effort. Lucas kept a safe distance, observing them through his binoculars. But as he watched the pod, he failed to notice one orca that had split from the group. It moved silently, its dark body blending into the water. Lucas only realized something was wrong when he felt a sudden, powerful jolt. The kayak shook violently, nearly tipping over. He froze, looking down at the water. A massive orca had rammed the side of the kayak. Its sleek body rolled beneath him, and he saw the distinct white patches near its eyes. It wasn't playing. This was a direct strike. Before Lucas could react, the orca rammed the kayak again, this time harder. The kayak tipped over, sending him crashing into the icy water. The shock of the cold took his breath away. His arms flailed as he struggled to surface, his heavy clothing dragging him down. The kayak, now upside down, drifted a few feet away. Lucas trod water, gasping as his body adjusted to the freezing temperature. The orca circled him, its dorsal fin cutting through the water like a knife. Lucas knew orcas rarely attack humans, but this one's behavior was different. It wasn't swimming away. It was curious, its massive body moving closer with each pass. Lucas kicked his legs to stay afloat, but the cold was sapping his strength. The orca disappeared beneath the surface and Lucas panicked. He turned in every direction, searching for the massive predator. Seconds later, it surfaced just a few feet away, spraying water from its blowhole. Lucas scrambled toward a nearby ice floe, using every ounce of strength he had left. The ice was slick and uneven, but he pulled himself halfway onto it. His hands burned from the cold as he gripped the edge, trying to steady himself. The orca didn't leave. It circled the ice floe, nudging it gently as if testing its stability. Lucas lay flat, his chest heaving as he tried to catch his breath. He felt a sharp pain in his ribs where the kayak had struck him during the capsizing. His left leg throbbed from where it had slammed against the side of the kayak during the attack. Blood seeped through his wetsuit, and he realized he must have been cut during the struggle. The orca's head emerged from the water, its black eyes locked onto Lucas, its mouth partially open, revealing rows of sharp teeth. Lucas could hear the clicking sounds of its echolocation, a rapid series of clicks and whistles that orcas use to communicate and hunt. It was studying him, trying to understand what he was. Lucas stayed as still as possible, his heart pounding. He hoped the orca would lose interest, but it rammed the ice floe, nearly knocking him off. He grabbed onto a jagged piece of ice, his fingers numb from the cold. The orca dove again, disappearing into the deep. Lucas knew it could return at any moment. Minutes felt like hours as Lucas clung to the ice. His body was shaking uncontrollably, the cold creeping into his bones. He tried to focus on his breathing, keeping his movements slow to conserve energy. He looked around, hoping to spot a boat or another kayaker. But the bay was empty. He was alone with the orca. When the orca resurfaced, it was further away. It seemed to lose interest, swimming in wider circles before finally heading back toward the pod. Lucas watched as its dorsal fin disappeared into the distance. Relief washed over him, but he knew he wasn't safe yet. The cold was unbearable, and his injuries were severe. Lucas pulled himself entirely onto the ice floe using his strength. He fumbled for the emergency whistle in his jacket pocket, blowing it as loud as possible. The sound echoed across the bay. Minutes later, he heard the faint hum of a boat engine. A rescue crew spotted him, pulling him aboard and wrapping him in blankets. Lucas survived the attack, but his body was battered. His ribs were bruised, his leg was cut deeply, and his hands were swollen from frostbite. The encounter shook him, a rare and terrifying reminder of how unpredictable nature can be. The northern coast of California is rugged and wild, with jagged cliffs, hidden coves, and deep waters. This area, known for its abundant marine life, also attracts one of the ocean's most powerful predators, the great white shark. These sharks, which can grow up to 20 feet long, thrive in these waters, feeding on seals, sea lions, and fish. They are a common sight for fishermen and divers, but encounters rarely escalate. For Michael Braxton, a 46-year-old fisherman from Eureka, California, the remote coves were his favorite spots to spend quiet days fishing. On September 12, 2024, he headed to Shelter Cove, hoping for another productive trip. Michael woke early, loading his small fishing boat with gear, bait, and enough supplies for a long day on the water. He was experienced, having spent years fishing along the California coast. Shelter Cove, tucked away far from crowded beaches, had always been one of his preferred spots. It was quiet, with few boats and plenty of fish to catch. By 7 a.m., Michael launched his Seawind boat into the cove's deep blue waters. The day started peacefully. Michael navigated past the rocky shoreline to deeper water, where fish were more plentiful. He dropped anchor about a mile offshore, adjusted his lines, and cast his bait. The ocean was calm, with only the occasional cry of a seagull or splash of a fish breaking the silence. Hours passed as he reeled in a few smaller catches, releasing most of them into the water. Around noon, he felt a stronger tug on his line, something big. Excited, Michael stood and began reeling in the line, the rod bending under the weight of the fish. The fight was intense, the fish pulling hard as Michael worked to bring it closer to the boat. He leaned over the side, straining to keep control of the line. That's when it happened. From the depths, a massive great white shark lunged toward the surface. Its wide jaws snapped shut on the fish Michael was reeling in, yanking the rod violently. The sudden force pulled Michael off balance and he slammed against the side of the boat. Before he could react, the shark reappeared, its body breaking the surface. It wasn't after the fish anymore. It was after him. The shark lunged again, its massive head striking the side of the boat. Michael lost his footing and fell into the water. The cold ocean shocked his body as he surfaced, gasping for air. He looked around frantically, trying to locate the shark. He saw it a few feet away, its dorsal fin cutting through the water like a knife. It turned sharply and came straight at him. Before Michael could move, the shark bit into his right leg. The pain was instant and overwhelming as the shark's teeth tore through muscle and bone. Michael screamed, kicking at the shark with his free leg. Blood clouded the water around him, but he didn't stop fighting. He punched the shark's snout, desperate to make it let go. The shark released him momentarily, its massive body thrashing as it circled back. Michael knew he had to get out of the water fast. His injured leg was useless, and every movement sent sharp pain shooting through his body. Using his arms, he swam toward the boat, which was only a few feet away. The shark circled him, its black eyes locked on its prey. Michael grabbed the edge of the ship, pulling himself halfway up. His strength was fading, but he managed to haul his body over the side and collapse onto the deck. He didn't have time to rest. The shark rammed the boat again, causing it to rock violently. Michael scrambled to the center of the deck, clutching his bleeding leg. Blood pooled around him, and he knew the scent would only draw the shark closer. He reached for his emergency kit, pulling out a tourniquet and tying it tightly around his thigh. The pain was excruciating, but it slowed the bleeding. The shark circled the boat, occasionally bumping it as if testing its strength. Michael's breaths came in short gasps as he struggled to think clearly. His radio was mounted near the controls on the other side of the boat. He crawled toward it, leaving a trail of blood behind. With shaking hands, he grabbed the microphone and called for help, giving his location and describing the attack. The minutes that followed felt like hours. Michael kept his eyes on the water, watching as the dorsal fin disappeared and reappeared. At one point, the shark launched partially out of the water, slamming into the side of the boat. The impact nearly knocked Michael overboard, but he held onto the railing, his heart pounding. Just when Michael thought he couldn't hold on any longer, he heard the faint sound of a helicopter. He looked up and saw the Coast Guard's bright orange chopper approaching. Relief washed over him, but the danger wasn't over. The shark was still circling and Michael's injuries were severe. The helicopter hovered above, lowering a rescue swimmer into the water. The swimmer signaled to Michael, then carefully approached the boat. The shark, sensing the commotion, moved closer. The swimmer climbed aboard, assessed Michael's injuries, and secured him in a harness. Together, they were lifted into the helicopter, leaving the shark behind. As the helicopter flew toward the nearest hospital, Michael drifted in and out of consciousness. His leg throbbed, and his body was cold from blood loss, but he was alive. The shark attack, happening in such a remote cove, raised questions among researchers and fishermen about the behavior of great whites in less frequented waters. It was a stark reminder of the risks of venturing into the ocean's domain for Michael. The Channel Islands off the coast of Southern California are a hotspot for marine life. Known for their clear waters, rocky reefs, and kelp forests, they're home to seals, sea lions, and an array of fish species. Orcas, also called killer whales, occasionally visit these waters while following prey or traveling in pods. These animals are powerful and intelligent, often hunting with precision and speed. Though orcas rarely attack humans, their size and strength make them one of the ocean's most formidable predators. On September 9, 2024, Greg Harmon, a 38-year-old marine biologist, was on a diving expedition near San Miguel Island, one of the most remote in the Channel Islands chain. Greg had been studying local fish populations and kelp forest health for years. He loved the ocean and had spent countless hours diving in these waters. That morning, Greg and his dive team left the small harbor on their research boat, heading to a site known for its rich biodiversity. The team had planned a full day of diving, with Greg leading the first descent. By 8:30 a.m., the team reached the dive site. The water was calm as Greg suited up, checking his oxygen tank and securing his fins and mask. He was experienced and organized, always double-checking his gear. The team reviewed the dive plan, and Greg and two others soon entered the water. They descended slowly, the calm ocean surrounding them as they adjusted to the underwater world. Greg focused on his work, documenting fish species and examining the kelp. The underwater environment was alive with movement. Schools of small fish darted around while larger ones glided near the rocks. Greg moved further from the group to take samples, staying within sight of his dive partners. He felt at home underwater, the steady rhythm of his breathing and the regulator calming his mind. About 40 minutes into the dive, something unusual caught Greg's attention. In the distance, he saw large shapes moving toward them. At first, he thought it might be a group of dolphins, which often swam in the area. But as the shapes grew closer, Greg realized they were orcas. There were 3 of them, their distinct black and white bodies moving gracefully through the water. Greg stayed calm, watching them from a distance. Orcas were rare in this part of the Channel Islands, and he felt excitement and caution. He signaled to his team to stay alert as the orcas swam closer. The animals were massive, their dorsal fins towering above their sleek bodies. They moved in unison, circling slowly. Greg kept still, not wanting to provoke them. One orca broke away from the pod, swimming toward him. Its movements were deliberate, and Greg felt a sudden spike of fear. The orca circled him, its black eyes locked on him. Greg's instincts told him something wasn't right. He began to back away slowly, trying to distance himself and the animal more. Without warning, the orca lunged. Its powerful jaws clamped onto Greg's leg, the force knocking him backward. Pain shot through him as the orca's teeth tore into his wetsuit and flesh. The attack was quick but devastating, leaving Greg disoriented. His regulator slipped from his mouth and water rushed in as he struggled to breathe. The orca thrashed, pulling him through the water like a rag doll before releasing him. Greg's body went limp momentarily as he tried to process what had just happened. Blood clouded the water around him and his vision blurred from the pain. He kicked weakly, trying to push himself away from the orca, but his leg was severely injured. The animal circled back, its massive body brushing against him. Greg's dive partners sprang into action. One swam toward him, grabbing his arm and pulling him away from the orca. The other diver created a distraction, banging on a metal rod to draw the orca's attention. The tactic worked momentarily, giving Greg's rescuer enough time to drag him closer to the surface. The orca stayed. It followed them, its movement slower but still menacing. Greg struggled to stay conscious, his body racked with pain and cold. The ascent to the surface felt endless, every second filled with the fear that the orca would strike again. When they finally broke the surface, the boat crew spotted them immediately. The divers shouted for help, and the crew threw down a rescue line. Greg's strength was almost gone as the team hauled him onto the boat. Blood poured from his leg, staining the deck as the crew worked to stabilize him. They wrapped his leg tightly, trying to stop the bleeding, and radioed for emergency help. The orcas lingered near the boat, their dorsal fins cutting through the water. The crew watched nervously, unsure if the animals would attack again. One orca surfaced briefly, its head rising above the water as if to observe the commotion. Then, just as suddenly as they had appeared, the orcas swam away, disappearing into the depths. Greg lay on the deck, shivering and barely conscious. His teammates stayed by his side, applying pressure to his wound and monitoring his breathing. The Coast Guard arrived about 20 minutes later, airlifting Greg to a hospital in Ventura. His injuries were severe, with deep lacerations and broken bones in his leg. Though the team's quick action saved his life, the attack shook everyone. Orca attacks on humans were exceedingly rare, and the encounter raised questions among researchers. What had caused the orca to act so aggressively? Was it a case of mistaken identity, or had something else triggered the attack? For Greg, the experience was a stark reminder of the unpredictable nature of the ocean and its most powerful predators. The beaches near Cape Town, South Africa, are world-renowned for their beauty and surf-friendly waves. Muizenberg Beach, in particular, attracts surfers of all skill levels year-round. The area is also known for great white sharks, which thrive in these waters, drawn by the large population of seals. Despite the risks, surfers regularly take to the waves, knowing the thrill of surfing often comes with the reality of sharing the water with one of nature's most fearsome predators. On July 8, 2024, 26-year-old Tom Ward, an experienced surfer and local to Cape Town, arrived at Muizenberg Beach just after dawn. Tom had been surfing since he was a teenager, and the beach felt like his second home. The conditions were perfect that morning: clean waves and a light breeze. The sun was still low, casting long shadows on the sand. Tom parked his car, grabbed his well-worn board, and headed to the shoreline. He stretched for a few minutes, warming up his shoulders and legs. A few other surfers were already in the water, their boards bobbing on the surface. Tom walked into the surf, feeling the cool water rise around his ankles and knees. He lay flat on his board and paddled out, slicing through the gentle breakers. By 7:15 a.m., Tom was sitting beyond the breaking waves, scanning the horizon for the next set. He caught his first wave, carving across its face, his body moving in sync with the board. The adrenaline rush made him eager for more, and he paddled back out, positioning himself for another ride. The ocean felt calm, almost too quiet. As Tom waited, his legs dangled in the water, something surfers do instinctively. He wasn't thinking about what might be below him, but focused on the waves. Then, without warning, a powerful force struck him from below. The impact was so sudden and violent that it knocked him clean off his board. Tom plunged into the water, disoriented. He opened his eyes underwater, trying to figure out what had happened when he felt an intense, searing pain in his right thigh. A great white shark had attacked, its mighty jaws biting down and tearing into his flesh. The pain was unimaginable, sharp and all-encompassing, as the shark's teeth sank deep into his muscles. Tom screamed, his voice muffled by the water as he thrashed wildly in an attempt to break free. The shark pulled him downward, its powerful body twisting and dragging him through the water. Tom's mind raced. He knew he had to act quickly or he wouldn't survive. Summoning every ounce of strength, he kicked the shark with his free leg, striking it repeatedly near its snout. The shark's grip loosened slightly, and Tom twisted his body, forcing the predator to release him. He shot upward, desperate for air, his lungs burning as he reached the surface. Tom gasped for breath as his head broke through the water. He looked around frantically, spotting his surfboard floating a few feet away. Blood poured from the wound in his leg, clouding the water around him. He grabbed his board, using it as a flotation device, but the shark wasn't done. Its dorsal fin cut through the water like a blade, circling him. Tom's heart pounded as he clung to the board, trying to stay calm. The shark lunged again, hitting the board with its massive head. The impact sent Tom flying off, splashing back into the water. He scrambled back onto the board, using it as a shield. The shark circled closer, its movements deliberate and terrifying. Tom swung the board toward the shark's head, hitting it as hard as possible. The predator veered away but didn't leave. Other surfers in the lineup had noticed the attack and began paddling toward shore, shouting for help. A lifeguard stationed on the beach saw the commotion and sprang into action, blowing his whistle and radioing for backup. The lifeguard jumped onto a jet ski and sped toward Tom, creating a wake that momentarily distracted the shark. Tom's strength was fading. His leg was nearly useless, the muscles torn and bleeding profusely. Each second felt like an eternity as he struggled to stay afloat. The shark, sensing his weakness, moved in again. Just as it closed the distance, the jet ski roared between them. The lifeguard shouted and slapped the water with a paddle, trying to scare the predator away. The shark hesitated, then dove beneath the surface, disappearing momentarily. The lifeguard pulled alongside Tom, grabbing him and hoisting him onto the back of the jet ski. Tom collapsed, his body shaking uncontrollably from shock and blood loss. The lifeguard sped toward the shore, the engine's roar drowning out the sounds of the ocean. Behind them, the shark's dorsal fin resurfaced, trailing the jet ski for a few seconds before finally retreating into the deep. On the beach, paramedics were waiting with a stretcher. They lifted Tom off the jet ski and laid him down, working quickly to stop the bleeding. His wetsuit was shredded, and the wound on his thigh was deep, exposing muscle and bone. Blood soaked the sand beneath him as they applied a tourniquet, wrapping his leg tightly to slow the flow. Tom's face was pale, his breath shallow and uneven. The ambulance rushed Tom to the nearest hospital, sirens blaring. Meanwhile, beach officials closed Muizenberg Beach, posting warning signs and advising surfers to stay out of the water. The attack left a heavy sense of fear among the local surfing community. Shark attacks in Cape Town are not unheard of, but such a brutal and close encounter is rare. At the hospital, doctors worked urgently to save Tom's leg. His injuries were severe, with multiple lacerations and deep puncture wounds that had damaged tendons and blood vessels. Despite the extensive trauma, Tom was lucky to be alive. The quick actions of the lifeguard and paramedics had prevented the worst. The incident was a stark reminder of the risks surfers take when entering the ocean. Even in popular spots like Muizenberg Beach, where lifeguards and surfers are always present, the unpredictability of nature can turn a perfect day into a fight for survival. For Tom, the attack was a life-changing event, one he would never forget.